I am a Wrangler at Creator Institute, and today we're going to be talking about how to outline a creative nonfiction book. There are a few different ways to kind of outline a creative nonfiction book based on what kind of CNF creative nonfiction book that you are writing. Typically, we see a lot of memoirs and essay collections, so that's what I'll be talking about today. We do have a document called How to Outline CNF Books, and this document goes over all of the stuff I'm going to talk about in more detail. So take a look at that if you're still, a little confused or on the fence about things. It'll go into more detail about everything that I'm about to go over. The first thing to kind of keep in mind is that memoir specifically is not really meant to be an overview of the writer's entire life, right? That would be impossible, really, to do, purely because a memoir is supposed to cover things in your life that happened over a very specific period of time. So when you outline, be very aware that you're not going to be able to fit your entire life into one book. People write multiple memoirs, like professional memoirists like Jordan Didion. She writes, a lot of memoirs about different points and events that have happened in her life. So keep that in mind when you're sitting down to outline your memoir. It should not be your entire life. As tempting as it is, and as much as we want to tell our whole life story in a single book, we just don't have the space to do that in one book. Write multiple. That's an option. But for a memoir, what you should kind of keep in mind are, what are your major themes? What are the things that you want to talk about in your memoir? And that could range from, loss to breakups to, finding yourself. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be negative or like overly heavy or anything like that. It can be, obviously. A lot of touching memoirs do cover particularly difficult periods in life, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So what you want your memoir to be about is really up to you. Now, there are ways that you should kind of approach the memoir outlining process. Obviously, everyone is different. If you find that this doesn't particularly help you or it doesn't really resonate with you, there are plenty of other ways to outline your memoir that will fit, with what your style is. But this is just a generally good way to kind of get your ideas out, especially if you're new to memoir. This will kind of help you just understand like what exactly goes into memoir planning and how you should go about it. So what you should first do is really just list out all of your events that you can think of. Like, think of everything in your life that you could potentially want to include in this memoir, and just write it down, somewhere. You don't have to be particularly picky about these things at this point in time. Just write them down. And once you have those down, then you can start thinking of them in terms of sections. So now that you have your ideas written out, just on a piece of paper or in a Word doc or wherever, really go through and see, how can you categorize these things? Can you categorize them by periods of your life, like maybe childhood, teenagehood, adulthood? Or can you do it by a particular place where you lived, maybe? Like, this period I lived in San Francisco. This period I lived in Los Angeles. Stuff like that. Whichever way you feel is going to be the best way to categorize your ideas, go ahead and do that. But split them up into sections. And then from there, you can kind of start linking those sections to the themes that you want to talk about in your memoir. So if you have a memoir and say you want to talk about loss, maybe you lost a parent when you were particularly young and you want to talk about that. And then you maybe also experienced another loss in your adulthood. When you know that your theme is dealing with loss, you can then take those sections and put them into your memoir. That way, things are staying on theme with what you want to write about, and you're also still covering significant points in your life without really needing all of the other stuff in between that doesn't necessarily fit with what you're trying to say. So once you have your big ideas, put them into sections, and from those sections, determine what sections fit with your themes. And then once you have all of that done, that's a lot, I know, but once you have all that done, then you can start really putting things into a timeline. This is mostly just for you to keep things straight as you're writing. Memory is a big part of memoir writing. So having any kind of tool that you can on the writer end that, the readers might not necessarily see, but tools that are going to help you just keep your facts straight, because it does rely a lot on memory. So do yourself a favor, make a timeline of the events that you want to include from your sections, and do be really picky. Really try to decide what moments in particular are the most relevant to what you're trying to say. And then put those moments in a timeline and use that timeline to help you relate the information back to each other, provide context, and everything like that. You don't have to write things chronologically. Obviously, you can if that's going to be the most helpful, but you definitely don't have to write it in that chronological order. But just having that timeline there will really help you kind of decide, what to work on next, how to relate it to other stuff that you have planned, and everything like that. And you can even potentially come up with an order from your timeline. You can do a memoir chronologically. A lot of memoirs do that, but you can also be a little bit more artistic with how you order things in the end. And having a timeline there and a set time frame for your book will be really helpful in that. And what I mean by time frame is having a clear start point and having a clear end point for your memoir. So to go back to the example from earlier, if maybe your themes are loss and you have experienced loss in both childhood and adulthood, choose those to be your hard stops. Don't feel like you need to go before that point or go after that point. You are talking about this specific time frame in which you dealt with loss. The more you push that end forward into the present, you're just going to keep going until your book is never done. So be really strict with yourself about that end point and that start point, and try really hard to, contain yourself to those points. That way, you'll actually get a book done at the end of this, and it'll cover a period of your life that was really important to themes that you want to discuss. On the other hand, essay collections are pretty straightforward when it comes to organization. The main thing you have to keep in mind is your thesis when you're doing an essay collection. And that doesn't really mean like an academic thesis that you'd use for a paper or anything like that. It more has to do with the message that you want to send your reader. Think of what you want that message to be, really plan it out, pick your subjects. Again, use a list, create a big list of all of the subjects that you want to talk about. And it can be a mix too. It can be a mix of personal, it can be criticism, anything that you want to write. Essay collections don't strictly have to be just personal or just, critique on society or anything. You can do a mix, but write out your ideas, all of them, into one document and determine what your themes are from that list. You could already know what you want your themes to be. But if you don't, just starting with a list is a good place to kind of see trends in the ideas that you have and really pick out what you want to tell your reader. From there, it's really just a matter of ordering what essays that you write. It's picking ones that all say what you want to say about a particular topic or about life. Whatever theme that you end up with will end up shaping the order and the essays that you actually choose to include. In general, it's a good idea to write more essays than you plan on including in your book, just so you can have a little bit of room to swap things out if you're finding that something isn't exactly what you want to say, but is along the line of what you want to say. So, keep a couple in the bank just so that you can work out any kinks as you get to the end of the ordering process. And again, this is covered in more detail in the How to Outline Creative Nonfiction books. There are plenty more tips in there for how to actually sit down and outline an essay collection. But the biggest thing to keep in mind for an essay collection is really just the order. There are a couple of things you should keep in mind when you're ordering your essays. First being the emotional impact it will have on your reader. A lot of essay collections touch on very personal or heavy topics, and those books are necessary. But it's important to consider the emotional capacity of your reader. So if you start on an essay that is really, really tough emotionally, maybe put an essay afterwards that isn't as heavy, that maybe explores an idea in a more lighthearted way. Another thing to think of is thematics. What is your theme? What are your themes? Your major themes? It should be, 1 to 3 big themes. And of course, there can be smaller lessons and teachings and whatever that you impart on the reader throughout. But what are your big themes? If you're finding that there are a couple that you keep running into, it might be a good idea to split your essay collection into parts. And you can maybe say part 1 is about loss, part 2 is about acceptance, and part 3 is about emerging on the other side, right? Really consider, what are your themes? How do they work together? And what is going to tell a compelling story? Even though essays are completely separate from one another, that doesn't mean they can't tell a story by the end of your book. So really consider the themes and how that will play into actually outlining your book. And then lastly, the thing to consider is you could do it chronologically. If you have a lot of personal essays in your book, you could do that where you order them according to when they happened in your life. Or if you cover a lot of, events in culture, you could go chronologically and try to say something about how something has evolved over time in culture. This is all covered in more detail in the creative nonfiction outlining document, and we do have other creative nonfiction documents as well to help you out. But the biggest thing to really keep in mind here is that you should be reading memoir if you're writing a memoir, and you should be reading essay collections if you are writing an essay collection. Not only will it give you a frame of reference for what writers are doing in those fields, but it'll also help you out. It'll help you decide what you like about certain memoir or essay collections, and it'll help you find out what you don't like about certain memoirs or essay collections. It'll just give you a better pool to pull from. So definitely read a lot of memoir and essay collections. And there are plenty of examples in the creative nonfiction documents that we have floating around. So if you are having a hard time finding them, just let your editor know and we can help you find them. But good luck with your outlining.